BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In today's episode, an internal report highlights inappropriate language at NFU Scotland meetings.
What this report says is that farming leaders need to do more calling out sexist, racist and homophobic language from members, amongst other things.
More on that later. First, the Crown Estate, one of the country's biggest landlords, has a new rural strategy and a new approach to farmland. All week we've been looking at tenant farmers, and today we'll hear about a novel way of getting a tenancy. But first we thought we'd hear from a landlord. The Crown Estate rents out 185,000 acres of farm and common land in England and Wales. 75% of the income goes to the UK Treasury and the rest to the King. It also rents out about 74,000 acres of farmland in Scotland, and there the money goes to the Scottish Government and the King. Well, as part of the estate's new approach, tenants are being offered environmental farm business tenancies, or green leases, as Rebecca Rooney reports.
We have a herd of about 600 to 800 Sussex suckler cows, with all the organic beef going into the Windsor farm shop.
The beef herd at Windsor is just a small part of the Crown Estate's business. It's landlord to more than 300 tenant farmers. Those tenants are being offered a new kind of lease. It's longer, 15 years instead of the usual 3 or 4, and each tenant farm will have an individual environmental plan. Paul Sedgwick is Deputy Ranger at Windsor and Director of Rural for the Crown Estate.
What we've done is we've sought within our environmental farm business tenancy, which we've drafted, or sort of green lease, as perhaps you might call it, to enable them to produce food, enable them to support the environment, but to make sure that the work they do on the environment is properly remunerated. And in our case, we've taken a view across the organisation to lower rents on land that is going into nature recovery. That, I think, has been well received. I think some of farmers were a little suspicious at the outset as to why the landlord was wanting to lower rents. But, we have to realise we're all in it together.
The Crown Estate set up a £20 million rural environment fund. Tenants can apply for money to help pay for nature restoration, things like planting hedges or restoring ponds.
We've asked our farmers to put up to 15% of their farms into nature recovery where appropriate, because obviously on grade 1 and grade 2 high quality land, that's much better for food production. Why 15%? A lot of our farmers, have firstly been doing that already, and secondly, the marginal land that they've been farming for crop production, they've been farming it because of unrealistic rent levels and demands from the landlord.
And does the tenant farmer get paid the benefit for the improvement?
Yes, the part of the new EFBT, the Environmental Farm Business Tenancy we put in place, is setting out how we might share those benefits going forward. So any future benefits that might come out of carbon credits or biodiversity credits, we need to make all these businesses fit for the future around, creating income stacking on their farms so that they're not reliant on BPS, the Basic Payment Scheme subsidy, which is being phased out, primary crop production, but also they've got diversified income streams in the broadest sense, whether that be converting an old tractor shed to a commercial storage unit, or tapping into emerging markets.
Simon Phillips farms 500 acres of arable for the Crown at Bingham in Nottinghamshire. He's one of the first to sign up to the environmental farm business tenancy.
We do get a reduction on the rent for the areas that are in the SFI and in the environmental schemes. There's not a fortune to be made out of it, but it definitely makes it worth doing.
The target is something like 15% of land to be put to nature recovery. Did the 15% worry you?
It did, yes. I mean, when you initially think about it, 500 acre farm, 15%, 75 acre to take out, it was quite daunting. But there's been a lot of give and take. We've worked between us to come up with the end game. And yes, we've taken land out of production, but it's bits and pieces that we're happy to take out of production, and the Crown are happy that those bits can be used for tree planting and hedge planting. So it works for both parties.
The Queen, I think, set up the herd. It is now the biggest herd of Sussex cattle in the UK.
Paul Sedgwick again. Even if you're a very successful tenant farmer, you must feel like all the power lies with your landlord. How do you kind of, make it truly a partnership?
I think that will take time to build up trust between both parties. Historically, the Crown's relationship with its rural land it's fallen in and out of love over the years with its land for different strategic reasons. But our board of commissioners are really, really engaged with our rural estates, and I hope that over time people will see that we're trying to do the right thing. Initial signs are really positive. I think with all these new schemes there will inevitably be nervousness and course correction as we go along.
Paul Sedgwick there from the Crown Estate. As we've heard this week, running a rented farm isn't easy, but the number of people keen to take on a tenancy means they can be hard to get. Well, that perhaps explains why so many would-be farmers have taken part in a TV show, with the prize being the tenancy of a National Trust Welsh hill farm. The second series of Channel 4's My Dream Farm will be shown this spring. Its creator and presenter is my Countryfile colleague Matt Baker, who told me they had more applicants than they expected.
To be honest with you, Charlotte, I was taken aback because initially we had over 100 applicants for the first series, which was up on the Wallington estate. I think people would be surprised at the amount of folk that are actually applying for these tenancies because, it's open to everyone, certainly as far as the National Trust are concerned. They welcome all sorts of people from all sorts of different life experiences. There's a lot of people out there that desperately want to farm but do not have a farm in the family that's handed down, or they could never afford to buy one.
Getting a tenancy is quite a complicated process, and the skills that you need to demonstrate for that don't necessarily make good TV, things like being able to be good at business and so on. How have you made it work?
For me, it was really important for everybody who was in this process to be able to demonstrate what they could bring to the tenancy. And I think for a lot of tenancies, it's all about finding the right fit for that particular farm. And so what we've done is we've basically taken the particulars that the National Trust were after, and each episode is based around those individual things. So everything from the big old gather, the helva, which is bringing all the sheep down off the mountains, through to the sheep sort, through to ram selection. But then there's the hospitality side of things because, this farm is in Eryri, Snowdonia, right in the heart of the national park there. And the recreation opportunities that the tenants have to create a viable business are huge. And I think when you watch this series, you realise how much of a jack of all trades these applicants have to be. And actually, these days, how farmers just have to be able to do so much.
This is, as you say, the second series. How are the winners of the first one doing?
Incredibly well. It was a local livestock auctioneer, Adam, and his wife Jenny, and their children who were successful. And they're doing so well. Business is booming for them. I mean, obviously, life is tough. You know what I mean? It's not a rose-tinted view of farming in any way, and it comes with all of its challenges. But they've had this opportunity, and they are absolutely making the most of it.
Matt Baker. Scottish farming leaders have been told they need to be more effective in calling out sexist, racist and homophobic language. An internal report presented to this week's NFU Scotland conference says inappropriate comments are going unchallenged. Well, agricultural policy and inheritance tax have also been discussed at the meeting. BBC Scotland's Rural Affairs correspondent Kevin Keane is there and asked delegates how they see the future for Scottish farming.
One thing that I see in Scotland, which is a fundamental issue, a big problem, is the fact that younger people find it almost impossible to get into the industry. Farmland is so expensive, no young person can basically buy land and make it work with the returns that come from farming.
I think the changes with the budget have been really impactful in the industry, and I think certainly in terms of well-being, I think it's had a really big impact on just the feeling and the value that people are putting on themselves. However, I do think today's conference has really highlighted that there are so many opportunities and there's a lot to be optimistic about.
The future it will be good for people, but I think there are going to have to be people who are prepared to change and innovate. And I think nationally, actually, we have to open our minds a little bit to technology. I don't think the answer is going backwards. I think the answer is adopting new technologies, gene editing and things like that.
We have so much potential to deliver as an industry for the environment and for our local communities, and I'm really passionate about our local communities and what we can deliver for those. So yeah, I remain always optimistic and always try and see the glass half full.
Delegates at the NFU Scotland conference there, which also heard this internal report on diversity and inclusion, which I suspect, Kevin, made hard reading for union leaders.
Yeah, indeed. Now, this is a report that is designed to really address the lack of diversity at kind of boardroom level at NFU Scotland. So the current board is entirely male, and there's a bit of a recognition that the union itself needs to do more to try to attract people into some of those positions from a more diverse background. So they've carried out this review. They've been speaking to some of the nearly 9,000 members of the union right across the country. And what this report says is that farming leaders need to do more calling out sexist, racist and homophobic language from members, amongst other things. And it says that some inappropriate comments are going unchallenged in meetings, for example. And one example of that includes members suggesting that the only good thing about Nicola Sturgeon are, quote, her legs. It also said that gender stereotypes were being reinforced by some members as well, by suggesting that members who are farmers should bring their wives to the annual conference here in Glasgow because, again, quote, the shopping is great. And it also said that some of the comments that were reported during this investigation could even be considered as sexual harassment and even as serious enough as to warrant a discrimination case against NFU Scotland. So it is a significant issue for the union. They say that they accept all 14 recommendations that are made in this internal report, and they say that they've put it out there to be kind of open and honest and start a conversation, and they say that they'll now be monitoring progress in this area every 6 months.
Well, away from that, the Scotland Office Minister, Kirsty McNeill, addressed the conference. She talked about inheritance tax. How did that go down?
Yeah, indeed. Well, it was a respectful exchange, I would say, and I think that there was some acknowledgement in the room that the Minister had come to the conference to face down what was obviously going to be a very angry set of people. But I'd say that those farmers did still manage to make their anger clear to the Minister. Now, Kirsten McNeill promised to ask the Treasury for a meeting with the industry's representatives of all 4 nations who've become, frankly, quite frustrated that they've not been able to get around the table with the Treasury. But I don't think that there was ever going to be a chance that she'd kind of come here and announce a change in the policy. I think there was an acceptance of that here. Nevertheless, it is pretty clear when you speak to farmers at the conference that the level of anger coming from them is just in no way subsiding.
Kevin Keane. And a new president of NFU Scotland will be elected later today, and we'll hear from him, and it will be a him because only men are standing, tomorrow. But that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Heather Simons, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.